The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Marcus Bulldog Rodriguez pressed his back against the cold stone, counting ammunition while insurgent voices echoed through the canyon below. His team of 8 Navy SEALs had been pinned down for 6 hours, their extraction window closing fast. The Taliban fighters knew exactly where they were. Someone had talked, or worse, someone had been watching all along. "Control, this is Viper 6, Rodriguez whispered into his headset, his breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn air. "We need immediate air support. Grid follows, 40789 or 245. The coordinates placed them in a kill box barely 3 clicks from the Pakistani border, where American aircraft weren't supposed to operate without diplomatic clearance that could take hours they didn't have. The silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Control's response came back tense and clipped. "Viper 6, negative on immediate air support. Diplomatic constraints in your sector. Stand by for extraction assets." Rodriguez closed his eyes. Extraction assets meant helicopters, and helicopters meant noise, and noise meant every fighter within 20 kilometers would converge on their position. His men were already down to their last magazines. Petty Officer First Class Jimmy Torch Nakamura had taken shrapnel in his shoulder 2 hours ago and was losing blood despite the combat gauze. They needed something fast, something mean, something that could clear the valley without asking permission from politicians in Washington. "Viper 6, this is Control," the radio crackled again. "We're tasking available assets to your area. Call sign Reaper 27 is en route, ETA 15 minutes. Rodriguez frowned. He knew every close air support pilot in theater, had memorized their call signs and aircraft types during the mission briefing. Reaper 27 wasn't on any list he'd seen. The tactical frequency remained silent except for the occasional burst of Taliban communications on their stolen American radios, radios they'd probably taken from other dead Americans. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in this place, at this altitude, in this diplomatic nightmare of airspace restrictions and political hesitation. The distinctive whine of a turbofan engine, but wrong somehow. Too low, too fast, and coming from the wrong direction entirely. Rodriguez raised his night vision goggles and scanned the ridgeline, searching for navigation lights that never appeared. Whatever was coming their way was flying dark, below radar, in airspace that officially didn't exist on any military flight plan. The engine noise grew louder, and for the first time in 6 hours, Rodriguez allowed himself a thin smile. Captain Lydia Ghost, Volkov pulled her A-10 Thunderbolt II through a knife-edge turn at 800 feet, her aircraft invisible against the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. The Warthog's twin General Electric TF-34 engines whispered rather than roared, their sound muffled by the mountain walls as she hugged the terrain with the precision of someone who'd spent 3,000 hours learning to make a 30-ton aircraft disappear. Her hands moved across the controls with unconscious grace, trimming flight surfaces and adjusting thrust, while her eyes never left the heads-up display painting green symbology across her field of vision. "Viper 6, Reaper 27, she transmitted, her voice calm despite flying through airspace that could trigger an international incident. "I'm 2 minutes out from your position. Paint your targets with infrared laser. Acknowledge when ready for immediate danger close." The response came back tight with controlled desperation. "Reaper 27, Viper 6. We've got approximately 40 hostiles in the canyon below us, dug in behind boulder fields and fighting positions. They're using our own comm gear so they know we're talking. How copy?" Volkov's jaw tightened. Taliban fighters with American equipment meant ambush, meant intelligence leak, meant good soldiers were about to die because someone had sold them out. She banked left around a granite spire and caught her first glimpse of the tactical situation through her targeting pod. Muzzle flashes strobed in the pre-dawn darkness below, concentrated in a horseshoe pattern that had the SEAL team trapped against a cliff face with nowhere to run. Viper 6, I have visual on hostiles. Stand by. She selected her 3rd GAU-8 cannon and felt the familiar vibration as the 7-barrel Gatling gun spun up to firing speed. 4,000 pounds of depleted uranium rounds sat in her aircraft's belly, each one capable of turning a fighting position into smoking rubble. But danger close meant her friends were less than 100 meters from the target, closer than any training manual recommended for the Warthog's devastating main gun. The Taliban fighters had learned to fear the distinctive sound of an A-10's cannon, that deep mechanical growl that signaled death from above. But they'd never heard one approaching at midnight, flying dark through mountains that should have been impassable for fixed-wing aircraft. Volkov had spent 2 years perfecting night terrain following in the Warthog, turning her slow, ugly aircraft into something that could haunt enemy nightmares. Her targeting computer chirped as the laser designation appeared on her display. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had painted the primary target cluster with surgical precision, marking bolder positions where Taliban muzzle flashes had been most concentrated. Volkov lined up her attack run and felt the aircraft shudder as she pushed it through turbulence that would have torn lighter fighters apart. Time to introduce herself properly to the enemy below. The first burst from Reaper 27's cannon lasted exactly 2.3 seconds and delivered 68 rounds of 30 high-explosive ammunition into a Taliban fighting position carved from solid granite. The sound arrived before the aircraft, that signature BRRRRRT that echoed off canyon walls and sent shockwaves through insurgent communications networks. Rodriguez watched through his night vision as the boulder field simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater still glowing with heat signatures from depleted uranium impacts. Good hits, he called into his radio, but Reaper 27 was already banking for another pass, the A-10's bulk somehow graceful as it maneuvered between mountain peaks that rose 3,000 feet on either side. The pilot was flying like she owned these mountains, like she'd been born knowing every ridge and valley by heart. Taliban voices screamed across their stolen American radios, panic replacing the earlier confidence. They'd expected to massacre a trapped SEAL team before dawn, then disappear into Pakistan with American blood on their hands and equipment to sell. They hadn't expected death delivered by someone who turned night flying into an art form. Reaper 27, Viper 6, Rodriguez transmitted. You've got secondary targets moving north along the canyon floor, approximately 20 hostiles trying to flank our position. Copy, Viper 6. I see them. The pilot's voice remained steady, professional, betraying nothing of the split-second calculations required to engage moving targets in a canyon barely wider than her aircraft's wingspan. Danger close on the secondary targets. You're within fragmentation range of my next pass. Rodriguez pressed his team deeper into their rocky shelter. He'd worked with A-10 pilots before, knew their reputation for precision and their absolute dedication to protecting ground forces. But this pilot was different, operating alone in hostile airspace without backup, without official clearance, without anything but her own skill standing between 8 Navy SEALs and a Taliban execution squad. The second gun run came from a different angle, Reaper 27 diving down the canyon like a metallic hawk with talons made of depleted uranium. Her cannon fire walked across the Taliban fighters with mathematical precision, each burst timed to catch them between cover positions as they tried to retreat. The 30 rounds didn't just kill, they erased, turning human beings into component molecules scattered across Afghan granite. Steam rose from the cannon barrels as the A-10 pulled up and disappeared behind the eastern ridge, leaving only the echo of its engines and the sudden, profound silence of a Taliban ambush that no longer existed. Petty Officer First Class Nakamura looked up at Rodriguez with blood-soaked gauze pressed against his shoulder. "Who the hell was that, Staff Sergeant?" he whispered. Rodriguez didn't have an answer. Reaper 27 wasn't supposed to exist, wasn't on any roster he'd seen, wasn't part of any air support package briefed for this mission. But she'd appeared when they needed her most, flown an impossible profile through mountains that should have killed her, and delivered violence with a precision that bordered on supernatural. The radio crackled one more time. Viper 6, Reaper 27. Area is clear, your extraction window is open. Safe travels, gentlemen. Then she was gone, swallowed by the dawn sky like she'd never been there at all. Colonel James Hammer Morrison had been running air operations in Afghanistan for 18 months, and he thought he knew every pilot under his command. The A-10 squadron roster sat open on his desk at Bagram Airfield. Each name matched to aircraft tail numbers and mission schedules that accounted for every flight hour logged in theater. Reaper 27 wasn't listed anywhere, which presented a problem that kept him awake long after the successful SEAL extraction had been confirmed. "Sir, we've got an irregularity," Major Patricia Wells, his operations officer, announced as she entered his office with a stack of flight logs and a concerned expression. "The SEAL team from last night's op is asking about their close air support pilot. They want to submit her for a commendation." Morrison rubbed his temples. The diplomatic fallout from unauthorized aircraft operating near the Pakistani border could end careers and strain international relationships. But 8 Navy SEALs were alive because someone had ignored the rules and flown where they weren't supposed to be flying. "What did the Pakistani Air Defense Network record?" he asked. "Nothing, sir. No radar contacts, no radio intercepts, no treaty violations they can prove. Officially, no American aircraft operated in that sector last night." Wells placed a satellite image on his desk showing the destroyed Taliban positions. Unofficially, someone with a 30 cannon turned that canyon into a parking lot. Morrison studied the thermal imagery. The precision of the strike spoke to exceptional pilot skill, danger close engagements in mountainous terrain at night, with friendly forces less than 50 meters from impact points. Whoever Reaper 27 was, she demonstrated tactical proficiency that belonged in pilot training manuals. His secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa. Morrison answered with growing unease, expecting questions he couldn't answer about phantom aircraft and unauthorized operations. "Hammer, this is General Patricia Hayes at SOCOM," the voice said without preamble. "I understand you had some close air support irregularities last night. I need you to mark those mission files classified and forward all documentation to my office immediately." Morrison frowned. Special Operations Command didn't typically involve itself in routine air support missions. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand the classification requirements for—" "Colonel Morrison," General Hayes interrupted, "Reaper 27 is operating under authorities you don't have clearance for. The mission last night never happened, the aircraft doesn't exist, and the pilot isn't in your chain of command. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." Morrison's mind raced through the implications. Black operations, compartmentalized clearances, aircraft that officially didn't exist. It painted a picture of capabilities the Air Force wasn't supposed to acknowledge. "Good. One more thing, Hammer. If your SEALs ask about their guardian angel again, tell them she's classified." The line went dead, leaving Morrison staring at satellite imagery of perfectly executed close air support that officially never happened. Captain Lydia Volkov guided her through the pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned that overlooked details could mean the difference between coming home and becoming a crater in foreign soil. The Warthog sat on the apron at a classified airfield 60 miles north of Bagram, its gray paint scheme devoid of national markings or squadron insignia. To casual observers, it looked like every other A-10 in theater. To trained eyes, the subtle modifications, enhanced avionics, upgraded targeting systems, hardened communications gear, marked it as something special. "Morning, Captain," Technical Sergeant Maria Santos called from beneath the aircraft's port engine. "Your baby's ready to hunt. Fresh 30 load, full fuel, and I've tweaked the engine management system for high-altitude ops." Volkov nodded, running her hands along the cannon housing that dominated her aircraft's nose. The GAU-8 Avenger was the reason the A-10 existed. Everything else was built around that massive gun, including the pilot. She'd fired over 3,000 rounds in combat, each one aimed with the kind of precision that turned close air support from an art form into a surgical procedure. "Any word on today's tasking?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Her missions came through channels that didn't appear on normal flight schedules, targeting packages that weren't discussed in regular briefings, supporting operations that officially didn't exist. "Classified as usual," Santos replied with a grin that suggested she understood more about the Shadow War than her security clearance officially allowed. "But I loaded extra armor-piercing rounds, just in case." Volkov's radio crackled with an encrypted transmission. "Ghost, Control. Stand by for mission brief in Secure Facility Bravo. Acknowledge when ready to copy." She walked across the tarmac toward a nondescript trailer that served as the briefing room for missions that would never appear in official records. Inside, a single officer waited with maps, satellite imagery, and the kind of target folders that meant someone important was about to have a very bad day. "Captain Volkov," the intelligence officer began without preamble, "we've got a high-value target situation developing in the Corangle Valley. Taliban leadership meeting, probably including some foreign fighters from Pakistan. The location is technically outside our normal area of operations." Volkov studied the aerial photographs, noting the elevation, terrain features, and probable anti-aircraft threats. The valley was a known insurgent stronghold, defended by fighters who'd been killing Americans for over a decade. "What's the political situation?" "Complicated. The targets will be in a compound that's technically in disputed territory. Pakistani government claims it's their sovereign airspace, but they've been letting Taliban leaders operate there with impunity." The intelligence officer slid another photograph across the table. "These are the men who planned the ambush on those SEALs you helped last week." Volkov's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly on the mission folder. The Taliban fighters who'd nearly killed 8 American Special Operations soldiers were having a reunion party. How convenient. "Time frame. You've got a 4-hour window, starting at 1400 hours. After that, they disappear back into Pakistan where we can't touch them officially." Volkov stood and gathered the mission materials. Another unauthorized flight, another target that didn't exist, another mission that would never be discussed outside this trailer. She'd been flying these ghost operations for 8 months now, earning a reputation among ground forces who didn't know her real name but remembered the sound of her cannon when they needed salvation. As she walked back toward her aircraft, Technical Sergeant Santos called out, "Bring her home safe, Captain. The Taliban leaders won't know what hit them." Volkov allowed herself a cold smile. That was exactly the point. The Corangle Valley stretched below Reaper 27 like a green scar carved through granite peaks, its vegetation fed by streams that had run red with American blood for over a decade. Captain Volkov descended through cloud cover at 15,000 feet, her targeting pod painting thermal signatures across the valley floor, while she searched for the compound where Taliban leadership thought they were safe from American retaliation. "Control Reaper 27, she transmitted on the encrypted frequency. "I'm on station, beginning target reconnaissance." Her heads-up display showed multiple heat signatures concentrated in a 2-story building made of mud, brick, and concrete. Construction designed to withstand Soviet artillery from the 1980s, but not 30, depleted uranium rounds delivered with surgical precision. Through her targeting pod, she counted at least 15 individuals moving through the compound. their body heat glowing white against the cooler background. Reaper 27, control. We're showing elevated radio chatter in your target area. The hostiles know something's coming. Volkov banked left, using a ridge line to mask her approach while she studied the compound's defenses. 3 pickup trucks with mounted heavy machine guns sat in the courtyard, their crews scanning the sky with practiced alertness. These weren't amateur fighters. They moved with the discipline of men who'd survived American airstrikes before. Control, I count 3 technical vehicles and approximately 20 personnel. Request confirmation on rules of engagement. Reaper 27, you are cleared hot. All personnel in the target compound are designated hostile. Minimize collateral damage to surrounding structures. Volkov lined up her attack run from the northwest, approaching with the sun at her back to blind any shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles the defenders might possess. The A-10's armored cockpit could survive small arms fire and shrapnel, but a well-aimed Stinger missile could still ruin her day permanently. Her first pass targeted the vehicles, 3 short bursts from the GAU-8 that turned steel and aluminum into expanding clouds of superheated metal. The heavy machine guns fell silent before their crews could bring them to bear on her aircraft, their operators erased by rounds traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Good hits on the vehicles, she reported, pulling up and banking for another pass while Taliban fighters scattered from the compound like ants from a kicked nest. Beginning second attack run on personnel targets. The radio crackled with panicked voices speaking Pashto, Taliban commanders screaming orders that would never be followed because the men receiving them were already dead or running for their lives. Some tried to reach the tree line where American aircraft couldn't engage them without risking civilian casualties in the nearby village. Volkov's second gun run caught them in the open courtyard, her cannon fire walking across concrete and flesh with mathematical precision. Each burst lasted exactly 2 seconds, delivering just enough ammunition to neutralize the targets without wasting rounds that might be needed elsewhere. When the smoke cleared, the compound was silent except for the crackle of burning fuel from destroyed vehicles. The Taliban leadership meeting had been permanently adjourned. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez sat in the debriefing room at Bagram Airfield, facing a row of officers whose questions he couldn't answer honestly, without revealing information he didn't have security clearance to know. The SEAL team's after-action report mentioned close air support from an unidentified A-10, but everything else about that night in the mountains had been classified above his pay grade. Viper 6, Colonel Morrison began, your team performed exceptionally during a difficult tactical situation. However, there are some discrepancies in your report regarding the aircraft that provided fire support. Rodriguez kept his expression neutral. He'd been a Navy SEAL for 12 years, long enough to recognize when his superiors were dancing around classified operations they couldn't discuss openly. Sir, we received effective close air support from call sign Reaper 27. Without that pilot, we wouldn't have made it home. Understood, but there's no record of any aircraft with that call sign operating in your sector that night. Morrison slid a document across the table. We need you to amend your report to reflect that your team received support from unidentified friendly aircraft. Rodriguez stared at the paper, understanding the implications. His guardian angel was being erased from the official record, turned into a bureaucratic ghost that existed only in the memories of 8 soldiers who owed their lives to her skill and courage. Sir, with respect, that pilot deserves recognition for. Sergeant Rodriguez, Morrison interrupted, some heroes prefer to remain anonymous. The pilot you're referring to operates under authorities that require operational security we can't compromise. She knows what she did, and that has to be enough. Rodriguez signed the amended report, but made a mental note to remember everything about that night. The sound of the A-10's engines in the darkness, the precision of the cannon fire, the calm professionalism in the pilot's voice as she delivered salvation at 300 knots. Somewhere in the classified world of black operations, Reaper 27 was probably planning her next mission, preparing to be someone else's guardian angel. The Taliban would learn to fear the sound of her aircraft, but they'd never know her name. The official records would show that 8 Navy SEALs survived an ambush through their own skill and determination. The truth was more complicated, involving a phantom pilot who flew impossible missions in aircraft that didn't exist, protecting American soldiers in a shadow war that would never be acknowledged. Rodriguez gathered his gear and headed for the door, wondering if he'd ever see Reaper 27 again. In a war where heroes were measured by body counts and mission success rates, she was something different, a guardian spirit who appeared when hope was lost, delivered precisely applied violence, then vanished into the dawn sky like she'd never been there at all. He hoped the Taliban had nightmares about her. Captain Lydia Volkov's hands moved across the A-10's flight controls with unconscious precision, guiding her aircraft through a combat air patrol over the Helmand province, where intelligence sources had reported a large Taliban convoy moving toward a coalition forward operating base. The Warthog responded to her touch like a living thing, its controls heavy but predictable, demanding physical strength, but rewarding precise inputs with devastating accuracy. Reaper 27, control, the radio crackled. We're showing 15 to 20 vehicles moving southeast along Route Phoenix. Your target package includes technical vehicles, supply trucks, and possible high-value personnel. Through her targeting pod, Volkov could see the convoy stretched across 2 kilometers of desert highway, pickup trucks with mounted weapons, cargo vehicles carrying ammunition and supplies, and sedans that probably contained Taliban commanders who thought they were beyond the reach of American air power. They were moving in broad daylight, confident that their intelligence network would provide warning of incoming aircraft. Control, Reaper 27. I have visual on the convoy, counting 18 vehicles total, including 4 technical vehicles with heavy weapons. Request permission to engage. Reaper 27, you are cleared hot. Prioritize the armed vehicles, then work the soft targets. Volkov banked into her attack run, approaching from the convoy's rear to maximize the time her targets would remain in her cannon's effective range. The lead vehicles would have time to scatter, but the trailing elements would be trapped behind their own burning trucks with nowhere to run except into her next pass. Her first burst destroyed 2 technical vehicles simultaneously, the 13 rounds detonating their ammunition loads in brilliant flashes that sent shockwaves through the remaining convoy. Taliban fighters bilayed out of their vehicles and ran for drainage ditches beside the road, abandoning supplies and weapons in their panic to escape the Warthog's devastating gun. Good hits on the technical vehicles, she reported, pulling up and banking for another attack run, engaging the supply trucks on my second pass. The cargo vehicles tried to accelerate, their drivers desperate to reach an intersection where they could scatter in different directions and present her with multiple targets instead of a single concentrated convoy. Volkov adjusted her dive angle and caught them before they could separate, her cannon fire methodically working from front to rear until the entire supply column was burning, wreckage scattered across 500 meters of Afghan highway. When she pulled up from her final pass, nothing remained of the Taliban convoy except smoking metal and scattered equipment. The insurgents who'd survived were running across the desert without weapons, vehicles, or supplies, reduced to refugees in their own country by 6 minutes of precisely applied violence. Control, Reaper 27. Convoy is destroyed, area is clear. RTB for rearm and refuel. Her radio crackled with a different voice, ground troops somewhere in the area who'd been watching the engagement through binoculars. Reaper 27, this is Bulldog 3-1. Outstanding work on that convoy. You just saved us a lot of trouble. Volkov allowed herself a rare smile as she turned toward home. Another day, Another Taliban formation erased from the battlefield by an A-10 pilot who officially didn't exist. The morning intelligence briefing at the classified airfield north of Bagram contained the kind of target package that made experienced pilots pause and recalculate their life insurance premiums. Captain Volkov studied aerial photographs of a mountain fortress carved into granite cliffs, its defensive positions designed by Soviet engineers in the 1980s and improved by 20 years of Taliban occupation. "This is the problem, Captain," the intelligence officer began, pointing to thermal imagery that showed dozens of heat signatures moving through underground tunnels. The compound controls three major smuggling routes between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Every IED component, every foreign fighter, every kilogram of heroin that crosses the border comes through this facility. Volkov noted the elevation markers on the topographical maps. The fortress sat at 9,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by peaks that rose another 2,000 feet higher. Attacking it would require flying through a canyon barely wide enough for her A-10's wingspan, with no room for evasive maneuvering if the defenders launched surface-to-air missiles. What about defensive capabilities? Soviet-era ZSU-23 anti-aircraft guns, plus probably a dozen RPG teams and small arms. The facility is built into the mountain. Your 30 rounds won't penetrate the main tunnels, but you can collapse the entrances and trap everyone inside. The intelligence officer slid another photograph across the briefing table. The targets include at least 3 high-value individuals who have been coordinating attacks against coalition forces for the past 6 months. If we can seal this facility, it disrupts their entire logistics network. Volkov calculated approach angles, weapons loads, and fuel requirements while studying the terrain features. The mission would require multiple attack runs through defended airspace, with each pass exposing her aircraft to concentrated anti-aircraft fire from prepared positions. The Taliban fighters weren't amateur guerrillas. They were experienced gunners who'd been shooting down Soviet helicopters before she was born. Time constraints. You have a 2-hour window starting at dawn. Pakistani intelligence sources suggest the targets will evacuate to Pakistan if they detect incoming aircraft. Volkov stood and gathered the mission materials, her mind already planning the attack profile that would give her the best chance of survival while maximizing damage to the target. The fortress had been killing Americans for years, but tomorrow morning, it would learn why Taliban fighters had nightmares about the sound of A-10 engines. "I'll need maximum ammunition load and extra fuel for extended loiter time," she told the intelligence officer. "If we're going to shut down their logistics network, I want to make sure nobody walks away from this one." Technical Sergeant Santos was waiting beside the aircraft with a grim expression that suggested she understood the difficulty of the mission ahead. "Captain, I've loaded maximum 30, plus 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles for hardened targets. Your bird is ready to take on the devil himself." Volkov performed her pre-flight inspection with extra attention to detail, knowing that mechanical failure in the mountains would mean death or capture by enemies who specialized in torturing American pilots. The A-10's titanium armor could stop small arms fire, but she'd be flying through a canyon where every rock could hide an RPG team. As dawn broke over the mountains, Reaper 27 lifted off into the hostile sky, carrying enough firepower to level a city block and the skill to apply it with surgical precision. The approach to the mountain fortress required Volkov to fly through a canyon system that twisted like a serpent between granite walls, her aircraft's wingtips clearing rock faces by less than 50 feet on either side. The A-10's engines echoed off stone walls that had witnessed 40 years of warfare, their sound announcing her presence to defenders who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Control, Reaper 27, she transmitted, her voice steady despite pulling 4GS through a turn that brought the fortress into view. "I have visual on target. Beginning attack run on primary entrance." The fortress emerged from morning shadows like something from a medieval nightmare, its gun positions carved directly into living rock and connected by tunnels that disappeared into the mountain's heart. Muzzle flashes strobed from defensive positions as ZSU-23 anti-aircraft guns opened fire, their tracers forming geometric patterns against the dawn sky. Volkov's first Maverick missile struck the main entrance with surgical precision, its shape-charged warhead collapsing tons of granite and sealing the primary access tunnel. Her cannon fire followed immediately, walking across secondary positions and silencing two anti-aircraft guns before their crews could adjust their aim to track her fast-moving aircraft. "Good hits on the primary entrance," she reported, banking hard left to avoid return fire while setting up for another attack run. "Engaging secondary targets on my next pass." Taliban fighters emerged from concealed positions like ants from a disturbed nest, their RPGs and small arms creating a curtain of fire that lit up her aircraft's radar warning receiver. The A-10's armor deflected most of their rounds, but several impacts sent vibrations through the airframe that reminded her how quickly combat could turn deadly. Her second missile destroyed a communications antenna, cutting the fortress's connection to outside networks and trapping its occupants in their mountain stronghold. The third cannon followed, methodically destroying weapons positions and collapsing tunnel entrances until the ancient fortress became a granite tomb for its defenders. When Volkov pulled up from her final pass, the fortress was silent except for the occasional crack of settling stone. 20 years of Taliban logistics operations had been erased in 8 minutes of precisely applied violence, delivered by a pilot who would never receive official recognition for turning an impregnable stronghold into rubble. Control Reaper 27. Target is destroyed, all entrances sealed. The mountain fortress is permanently closed for business. Her radio crackled with acknowledgement from ground forces across the theater. "Outstanding work, Reaper. You just made our jobs a lot easier." As she turned toward home, Volkov reflected on the strange nature of her war. She flew missions that officially didn't happen, destroyed targets that weren't supposed to exist, and protected soldiers who would never know her name. But every sealed tunnel and silenced gun position meant fewer Americans would die in ambushes planned in mountain fortresses. The Taliban would build new strongholds and train new fighters, but they'd do it while looking over their shoulders for the sound of A-10 engines in the dawn sky. Major Patricia Wells found Colonel Morrison in his office at 200 hours, poring over classified communication intercepts that painted a troubling picture of enemy tactical adaptation. The Taliban had stopped using their normal radio frequencies, modified their movement patterns, and begun operating in smaller groups that were harder to target with conventional airstrikes. "Sir, we've got a pattern developing," she announced, placing translated documents on his desk. "Taliban commanders are issuing specific warnings about low-flying aircraft operating in areas where we don't officially have air assets." Morrison looked up from his coffee, which had long since grown cold during his review of after-action reports that officially didn't exist. The Phantom operations were having a measurable effect on enemy behavior, forcing tactical changes that disrupted their logistics and command structure. "What kind of warnings?" "Listen to this," Wells said, reading from a decoded message. "All units avoid canyon operations during dawn and dusk hours. The American Ghost aircraft strikes without radar warning. Avoid gathering in groups larger than 5 personnel." She looked up with a grin. "Sir, they're calling her the Ghost of the Mountains." Morrison smiled despite his exhaustion. Reaper 27 was becoming a legend among both American forces and Taliban fighters, a phantom pilot whose precise violence was reshaping the tactical balance across 3 provinces. The enemy's fear was almost as valuable as her actual combat effectiveness. "Any indication they're trying to counter her specifically?" "Negative, sir. They can't counter what they can't track. Our girl flies below radar coverage, avoids established air defense zones, and strikes targets they didn't know were vulnerable. The Taliban leadership is paranoid about traveling in groups or using permanent facilities. Wells placed another document on Morrison's desk, casualty reports showing a 40% reduction in American deaths from IED attacks over the past 2 months. The ghost operations were working, disrupting enemy supply lines and command networks in ways that conventional airstrikes couldn't achieve. Sir, there's something else. We're intercepting communications from Pakistani intelligence expressing concern about unauthorized aircraft operating near their border. They can't prove anything, but they're asking questions through diplomatic channels. Morrison nodded grimly. The political complications were inevitable when operating aircraft that officially didn't exist in airspace they weren't supposed to enter. But 8 Navy SEALs were alive because someone had ignored the diplomatic niceties, and that success would be measured against any international incidents. Keep monitoring the intercepts, Major. If the Pakistanis start making formal complaints, we'll need to know immediately. As Wells gathered her documents and headed for the door, Morrison returned to his coffee and his classified reports. Somewhere in the mountains, Reaper 27 was probably planning her next mission, preparing to be the Taliban's worst nightmare and America's most valuable asset that officially didn't exist. The enemy called her a ghost, and that seemed appropriate for someone who haunted their dreams while protecting American soldiers. Captain Volkov's aircraft maintenance logs told a story of combat intensity that few pilots in theater could match. Over 400 combat hours in 8 months, with her A-10's armor showing impact marks from small arms fire and shrapnel that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. Technical Sergeant Santos performed her inspections with the reverence of someone maintaining a piece of military history. "Captain, we've got some concerns about metal fatigue in the port engine mount," Santos reported during the pre-flight briefing. "Nothing immediately dangerous, but the stress patterns suggest you've been pulling more GS than normal for an A-10. Volkov nodded, unsurprised by the mechanical wear. Flying through mountain canyons at high speed required maneuvering that pushed the Warthog beyond its normal performance envelope, trading structural longevity for tactical advantage. Every tight turn and high-G pullout brought her closer to mechanical failure, but also kept her alive in hostile airspace. "How much longer before we need major repairs?" "Maybe 50 flight hours, depending on mission profile. If you keep threading needles through mountain passes, we'll need to replace structural components sooner rather than later." The classified aircraft sat on the apron like a predatory bird, its gray paint scheme showing the scars of combat operations that would never appear in official maintenance records. The 30 cannon housing bore witness to thousands of rounds fired in anger, each one aimed with precision that turned close air support into an art form. Volkov's secure radio buzzed with an encrypted transmission. "Ghost, control. We've got a time-sensitive target developing in Sector 7. Taliban leadership convoy moving toward Pakistani border, ETA 45 minutes to international boundary." She looked at Santos with raised eyebrows. 45 minutes meant no time for detailed mission planning, no intelligence briefing, no diplomatic clearance for operations near Pakistan. It meant launching immediately and adapting to the tactical situation while flying at maximum speed toward a target that might disappear before she arrived. "Load maximum ammunition and prepare for immediate launch," she told Santos. "This one's going to be interesting."